All right, so inverse trig worksheet 1, we are practicing evaluating inverse trig functions. So to begin with, remember there should only be one right answer for each problem. And if it helps you, I think it's helpful to draw the half of the circle that you're allowed to select answers from. So from pi over 2 to negative pi over 2. And you can label all of these angles if you want to. But keep in mind, like, this is negative pi over 6, not 11 pi over 6. This obviously is pi over 6. So I just usually give myself that reminder. And these are the possible answers. This is the half of the circle we're allowed to select from for arc sine and for arc tangent. I don't know why my pen won't write right there. And then for arc cosine, you are restricted to the top half of the circle for your answers. So again, we'll go from like pi over 6 to 5 pi over 6. So no negative angle answers for arc cosine. So all of the answers for this first section should be find the angle that makes this trig function this value. So the arc sine of 1/2, what angle makes sine 1/2? That answer is pi over 6. What angle makes cosine radical 2 over 2? Pi over 4. What angle makes tangent equal to -1? So tangent is 1 at pi over 4, but it's equal to -1 at negative pi over 4. And it basically, here's a good rule or a good pattern to notice. Anytime it's arc sine or arc tangent of a negative, we should be getting a negative angle as our answer because we would have to be down in quadrant 4. If arc cosine is negative, we're not going to get a negative angle, but we are going to get a quadrant 2 angle. Okay, so what about cosecant? So I would like to rewrite this in terms of arc sine instead of arc cosecant. So the reciprocal of -2 radical 3 over 3, I just think of this as what was it before we took the reciprocal and rationalized. You could, I suppose, flip this and then do the work, but this is one just to know. We've done enough speed quizzes now that you should be able to flip that without having to simplify. So what angle makes sine equal to negative radical 3 over 2? So it's got to be a negative angle because we're down here in quadrant 4. And the angle where the y coordinate is radical 3 over 2 is down there at negative pi over 3. So remember, these are basically reverse speed quiz questions, except we are limited to 2 quadrants for our answers. We're only going to get one answer out of those 2 quadrants, and we use negative angles if we're in quadrant 4. Arc cotangent. So this might take a little bit of looking at coordinates on your unit circle here, so maybe I'll write this one out. So first of all, we're still between pi over 2 and negative pi over 2. And we're looking at where is the x over y radical 3 over 1. So right here at pi over 6, that ordered pair is radical 3 over 2, 1/2. Excuse me. So the x over y at that coordinate, that's the radical 3 over 1. So the answer here is pi over 6. If this said arc cotangent of negative radical 3, the answer would just be negative pi over 6. Secant is -2. I'm going to rewrite this, so I'm looking at arc cosine of -1/2. So I just took the reciprocal of that number. Remember, you're looking at the top half of the circle. So first off, where is cosine going to be negative? In quadrant 2. And then out of those 3 angles, which one has 1/2 as the x value? So that's at the pi over 3 angle, which is 2 pi over 3. When is sine equal to negative radical 3 over 2? At negative pi over 3. We actually had that in 4. I just asked it as starting as an arc cosecant problem. Inverse tangent of 0. When is tangent equal to 0? So the only non-quadrant ordered pair that you can use for tangent is 0, because you can't put in pi over 2, tangent's undefined. Same with negative pi over 2. So this answer is 0. This can get confusing. This 0 is a trig value, and this 0 is the angle. So I know it doesn't matter really, but it's easy to get that mixed up. What if we compose inverse trig with regular trig? So in this case, you do have to work from the inside out. So begin there, start on the inside, and simplify that. And I like to give myself a reminder, is the inside asking me to find an angle, or is it asking me to do a speed quiz question, like a unit circle value? So begin here. If it's arc something or if it's inverse something, you're supposed to figure out the angle on the inside. So this problem is going to simplify to the sine of some sort of theta. I just have to figure out the theta. So what's the arctangent of -1? Tangent is -1 down here at -π/4. So you begin any composition by simplifying the inside. Now the question is just what's the sine of -π/4? So that could be a speed quiz question, right? What is the y-coordinate at -π/4? The y-coordinate is negative radical 2/2. Or speed quiz style, I would say, well, the sine of π/4 is radical 2/2, and because this is negative, I'm in quadrant 4, so I make my answer negative. Now we're doing the reverse on number 10. The inside function is asking you for the trig value. This is asking you what's the y-coordinate at 3π/2. So the sine of 3π/2 is -1, and we're supposed to take the arc cosine or the inverse cosine of that answer. So what is the inverse cosine of -1? This is asking you to find an angle. Okay, so theta is equal to pi, because pi on our arc cosine options, pi is where the x coordinate is -1. You don't have to write theta equals pi. I'm just doing that to remind you what we're looking for. This would be like the sine of -π/4 is saying like what's the y coordinate. So this could have been like y equals. Okay, on this one, start on the inside. Arc cosine, so we should be finding an angle to begin with. So this is going to be the tangent of an angle. What angle makes cosine radical 3/2? That's π/6. Now it's what's the tangent of π/6? Remember, that's y/x at π/6. The y-coordinate is 1/2. The x-coordinate is radical 3/2. That's 1/radical 3. And then we'll simplify that to radical 3/3. If another way to look at this, if it's a regular trig function on the outside, you should get a trig value as your final answer. If it's inverse trig on the outside, you should get an angle as your final answer. So for the next one, it's inverse trig on the outside, so I should get an angle when I'm done with this. I want to start on the inside though. The secant of pi, so this is what's the reciprocal of the x value at pi. The x value is -1, and the reciprocal of -1 is -1. So now the problem is, what's the arc sine of -1? Remember, this is equal to an angle, theta. So what angle makes sine -1? We're not going to say 3π/2. We're going to say -π/2. Remember, you are restricted to the top and bottom half of the circle. All right? Start on the inside. The cosecant of π/6. So we want the reciprocal of the y value at π/6. So sine of π/6 is 1/2. The reciprocal of that is 2. Oh, wait, I fixed this. Sorry. This should say π/2. The reason I had to fix that is inverse, what angle makes cotangent 2? We would need a calculator for that. Okay, so start this again. Cosecant of π/2, what's the sine of π/2? 1. What's the reciprocal of 1? 1. And then we want the inverse cotangent of 1. That means find the angle that makes cotangent 1. That's π/4. Okay, now on this one, it might seem like inverse cosine and cosine should just cancel each other out. And those operations do cancel each other out. But the question is, would the answer still be 7π/6? So no, because 7π/6 is not between 0 and pi. So the best way to tackle these is not to cancel stuff out, but just keep working inside, outside. So what is the x-coordinate at 7π/6? The x-coordinate is negative radical 3/2. Because you're in quadrant 3, cosine's negative. And now we want the inverse cosine of negative radical 3 over 2. So remember, for inverse cosine, put this down here, maybe, there we go. For inverse cosine, we're looking at just the top half of the circle. So cosine will be negative radical 3 over 2 over here in quadrant 2. And, over here in quadrant 2. And that's at the 5 pi over 6 angle. So theta is 5 pi over 6. Okay, start with the angle. What angle makes cotangent negative radical 3? So let's see, if we're looking at our unit circle here, cotangent is x over y. So we're thinking which angle has its x coordinate at radical 3 and its y coordinate at 1. So it's a pi over 6 angle, but we're down here, because this is negative, we're down here in quadrant 4. So this is the sign of negative pi over 6. Now, what is the sign of pi over 6? Well, sign of pi over 6 is 1/2, but you're down in quadrant 4. So we get negative 1/2 for this answer. Start on the inside, arc sine of 1. So we want the theta that makes sine equal to 1. That's pi over 2. So now this is the tangent of pi over 2. And the tangent of pi over 2, the y over x up at the top of the circle, is undefined. Or maybe you remember, now that we've graphed tangent, that that's where a vertical asymptote is. Same thing on 17 as 14. I don't want to just cancel these, even though they are inverse operations. They do cancel each other, but the answer is not necessarily 11 pi over 6. Because remember, we're restricted to negative pi over 6 to pi over 6. Negative pi over 2, to pi over 2. Okay, so what is the sign of 11 pi over 6? It's negative 1/2. What's the arc sine of negative 1/2? It's negative pi over 6. So another way to think of that is, yes, these do cancel, but think of, where does 11 pi over 6 fall? Right here. And how am I supposed to name that? I'm not supposed to call it 11 pi over 6. The range of arc sine has to be a negative angle for that fourth quadrant. Okay, that finishes this worksheet. This can be confusing. It just kind of takes some practice. The biggest thing is practicing whether you're finding the angle and then turning around doing the speed quiz question, or vice versa.